The smell of warm bread and fresh coffee filled the tiny kitchen of Nora Bell's catering business every single morning before the sun even came up. Nora was already on her feet by 5, tying her apron strings and humming softly to herself while she stirred a big pot of grits. She had built her little catering company from nothing. Just her 2 hands, her grandmother's recipes, and a whole lot of love. Welcome to Auntie's Stories. I share real-life stories with you every single day, and I would be so happy if you hit that subscribe button and gave this video a like. Now let me get right back into this story because trust me, you are going to want to hear every single word. Nora had been running Bell's Catering for 8 years. She cooked for weddings, funerals, birthday parties, company luncheons, and neighborhood block parties. People called her 3 months in advance just to make sure she was available. Her food had a way of making people feel like they were sitting at their grandmother's table on a Sunday afternoon, safe and full, and loved. That particular Tuesday morning started like every other. Nora was loading trays of sweet potato pies into her van when her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She almost ignored it. She had a big church luncheon to deliver by 10. But something made her stop and pick it up. It was a number she did not recognize, with a downtown Atlanta area code. She almost let it go to voicemail but pressed accept at the last second. "Good morning, is this Ms. Nora Bell?" "Yes, this is Nora." The voice on the other end was calm and professional. "My name is Raymond Clark. I am a property attorney with Clark and Whitfield Law Group. I am calling regarding the estate of your godfather, Mr. Eldon Price." Nora set down the tray she was holding. Eldon. She had known that man her whole life. He had passed away 6 weeks ago after a long illness, and she had cried at his graveside like she had lost her own father, because in every way that mattered, she had. "Ms. Bell, Mr. Price left something to you in his will. Something quite significant. I would like to meet with you as soon as possible to go over the details." Nora stood very still in her kitchen. The sweet potato pies were steaming gently behind her. "What did he leave me?" she asked quietly. "Mr. Price left you full ownership of Price's Table, Ms. Bell, the restaurant on Peachtree Lane." Nora's breath left her body like someone had opened a window in her chest. Price's Table was not just any restaurant. It was one of the most celebrated dining establishments in all of Atlanta. Eldon had opened it 40 years ago as a humble soul food spot with 10 tables and mismatched chairs, and over the decades it had grown into a landmark. Presidents had eaten there. Famous musicians had celebrated there. Food writers flew in from New York just to review the seasonal menu. And Eldon Price had left it to Nora. She sat down right there on her kitchen floor because her legs simply would not hold her anymore. She pressed her hand to her chest and breathed slowly, trying to make the world stop spinning. She thought about the first time Eldon had let her stand beside him in that big restaurant kitchen. She was 11 years old and barely tall enough to see over the prep counter. Her mother had worked as Eldon's kitchen manager for years, and when her mother passed away from a sudden heart attack, Eldon had quietly stepped in. He paid for Nora's school supplies, showed up to her graduation, and every summer let her work beside him learning the business. "You have a gift, Nora girl," he used to tell her. "You cook the way your mama did, from somewhere deep inside." Tears were already sliding down her cheeks by the time she pressed end on the call. She wiped her face, finished loading the van, and delivered the church luncheon without saying a word to anyone about what had happened. She needed time to sit with this alone before the world found out. But the world found out sooner than she expected. When Nora arrived home that afternoon, her husband Marcus's truck was sitting in the driveway even though he should have been at work for at least another 2 hours. She could feel something heavy in the air before she even opened the front door. Marcus was standing in the living room with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with kind eyes that were not looking so kind right at this moment. "Nora, is it true?" His voice was low but strained. She blinked. "Is what true? Don't do that." His mother called him. "Did Eldon Price leave you his restaurant?" Nora exhaled slowly. She had planned to tell him tonight over dinner, gently, with time to talk it all through. "I was going to tell you when I got home." How does your mother already know? Marcus rubbed the back of his neck and looked away. She plays bridge with the wife of Eldon's head chef. The whole restaurant staff is talking about it. Apparently everyone over there is in shock that it went to you instead of one of the senior managers. Nora sat down on the armchair across from him. Eldon raised me after my mama died. You know that. Marcus, course I know that. But Nora, this is not a little catering kitchen. Do you have any idea what you are walking into? She looked at him steadily. I know exactly what I am walking into. I spent years in that kitchen. I know that staff, I know those recipes, I know that building. Marcus shook his head slowly. Running a catering company and running a restaurant like Price's Table are two completely different things. There are investors to manage, vendors to negotiate with, a full staff of 40 people, a liquor license, health inspections, a public reputation that has been built for 40 years. His voice was rising a little, and Nora heard something underneath it that she could not quite name yet. She just waited. Marcus, she said quietly, why does this feel like you are trying to talk me out of it? He stopped pacing and looked at her. My mother thinks we should talk about this as a family before you sign anything. Nora went very still inside. She felt something cold move through her. His mother. Laverne Wells was a woman who had made it very clear since the wedding day that she thought her son had married beneath himself. She was polite enough at holidays and sharp enough when she thought Nora was not listening. She had always called Nora's catering work a little hobby, as though building a business from scratch with no help from anyone was something to pat on the head. What does Laverne have to do with my inheritance? Nora asked, keeping her voice completely level. Marcus looked away again. She's coming for dinner. She wants to sit down and talk it through together. Nora stood up. You called your mother before you even spoke to me. I didn't call her. She called me. He ran a hand over his face. She just thinks we should be smart about this. We could sell it, Nora. We could take the money and pay off the house, take a vacation, invest it properly. We don't have to keep it. Nora walked past him to the kitchen without another word. She needed her hands to be busy. She needed something to do while she decided how to hold herself together. She had not even read Eldon's letter yet. The attorney had given her an envelope sealed with old wax and she had tucked it safely in her purse, saving it for a quiet moment. That quiet moment was clearly not coming tonight. Laverne arrived at 6 sharp, which was 10 minutes before she was expected, which Nora knew from experience was her way of reminding everyone that she operated on her own schedule. She walked in wearing a crisp cream blazer, her hair freshly done, and the kind of pearls she only wore when she was planning to make a point. Nora, sweetheart, she said, breezing past her into the living room without being invited further in. What a day you must have had. She settled into the armchair like it was her own living room. I heard the news from Patricia Chen. You know her husband runs the wine program over at Price's Table. The whole dining world is buzzing. Nora set a glass of water on the side table for Laverne and sat across from her. It was unexpected, she said simply. Oh, I am sure it was. Laverne smiled carefully. Eldon was always fond of you, I know that. It is very touching that he wanted to honor that connection. She paused and folded her hands in her lap. But sentiment and business are two different things, aren't they? Nora watched her. And Marcus said you had some thoughts about the situation. I have thoughts about protecting this family, yes. Laverne leaned forward slightly. Nora, you are a wonderful cook. I've always said that. But a restaurant like Price's Table is not just a kitchen. It is a public institution. It needs strong management, the right connections, the right vision. She glanced at Marcus, who was leaning in the doorway. I have a business partner, a man named Roderick Voss, who has been looking to invest in a major Atlanta restaurant property. He would pay a very fair price. Nora felt her stomach tighten. You already found a buyer. Laverne waved her hand. I simply mentioned it to Roderick when I heard. There was no harm in that. He is prepared to make an offer immediately, which would save you the stress of trying to run something you have never run before, and give this family real financial security. She looked at Nora with an expression that was almost kind. Isn't that what we all want? Nora looked at her husband. Marcus was staring at the floor. She excused herself from the table, went to the bedroom, and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for 5 minutes. She did not cry. She breathed. She thought about Eldon standing at his big stove showing her how to season cast iron skillets. She thought about what he had told her the last time she visited him in the hospital 2 weeks before he died. He had held her hand and said, "I am leaving you something, Nora girl. Not because you need saving. Because you are the only one who understands. What I built." She stood up, straightened her back, and walked out to the dining room. She looked at Laverne and she looked at Marcus and she said very calmly, "I am not selling. I am accepting Eldon's gift and I am going to run Price's table the way he knew I could." Laverne blinked. "Now Nora, let's not be hasty." "There is nothing hasty about it." Nora sat back down and picked up her fork. "This conversation is finished. I will be meeting with the attorney tomorrow to sign the paperwork." Laverne looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Nora. Nora ate her dinner. The next morning Nora drove to the law offices of Clark and Whitfield and signed her name on every document Raymond Clark put in front of her. Her hand did not shake once. When it was done, Raymond handed her the sealed envelope. He told her that Eldon had left specific instructions that she was not to open it until after the papers were signed. Nora sat in her car in the parking garage and peeled back the wax. Seal carefully. Eldon's handwriting was large and looping, the way it always was when he wrote recipe notes on index cards. "My dear Nora girl, if you are reading this it means you said yes. And I knew you would because you are your mother's daughter and she never walked away from anything worth fighting for. I want to tell you some things before you walk through those doors for the first time as the owner. First, the kitchen staff has been with me for an average of 12 years. They are the heart of everything. Trust them. Second, the head chef, a man named Devlin O'Shea, may push back on you at first. He expected to inherit the restaurant and he will be hurt. Give him time. He is brilliant and loyal underneath the pride. Third, and most important, do not let anyone make you feel like you do not belong there. 'Cause you do. I built that place on your mother's recipes as much as my own. You are not an outsider walking in. You are a homecoming. With all my love, Eldon." Nora sat in that parking garage and cried until she could not breathe, and then she wiped her face on a napkin from the glove box and drove straight to Price's table. The restaurant was closed on Mondays, which meant the staff was doing prep and receiving deliveries when she arrived. The hostess at the front recognized her immediately. "Ms. Bell," she said carefully. Word travels fast, Nora thought. She asked to see Devlin O'Shea. She was brought to the kitchen, which was large and gleaming and smelled of stock simmering and fresh herbs. Devlin was at the far end trimming a rack of lamb. He was about 50, with clothes cropped gray at his temples and the quiet authority of someone who had run a professional kitchen for a long time. When he looked up at her, his face was completely neutral. "The new owner," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Nora replied. She walked over and held out her hand. Devlin shook it without expression. She did not flinch from his coolness. She understood it. "I know Eldon's decision surprised you," she said directly. "I imagine it was a painful surprise." Devlin set down his knife and looked at her for a long moment. "Eldon trained me for 19 years, he said. "I gave this restaurant everything I had." Nora nodded. "I know you did. I can see it in every corner of this kitchen." She looked around at the spotless surfaces, the organized stations, the handwritten prep schedules on the whiteboard. "Eldon trusted you with this kitchen every day for nearly 2 decades. That didn't change because of what he put in his will." Devlin studied her. "What exactly do you intend to do with this place?" Nora met his eyes. "Honor what Eldon built and make sure it is still standing 40 years from now." He paused. "But I cannot do that without you. I need you here, Devlin. And I want you to know that I am not coming in here to change everything. I am coming in here to learn and then to lead." Something shifted slightly in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but a kind of careful attention. "We have a vendor meeting Thursday," he said after a moment. "If you are serious about learning, you should be there." Nora nodded. "I will be there at 8. Good, he said, and picked his knife back up. That was the beginning. Over the next several weeks, Nora threw herself into learning every inch of Price's Table. She sat in on vendor meetings and staff briefings. She reviewed the accounts with the business manager, a meticulous woman named Gloria Tate who had been keeping the books for 12 years and who turned out to be one of Nora's greatest allies. She walked the dining room every evening before service and greeted the regulars, many of whom had been coming in since before she was an adult. Some of them had known her mother. They would catch her hand and say, "Your mama would be so proud," and Nora would have to breathe very carefully to stay composed. Meanwhile, at home, things were quiet in a way that had started to feel like distance. Marcus was polite. He asked about her days and listened when she talked about the restaurant, but there was something between them that had not been there before. Kind of reservation. Laverne had gone silent on the subject of selling, at least to Nora's face, but Nora had heard through a mutual friend that she was still talking to her business associate Roderick Voss. She did not bring it up with Marcus. She was watching to see what he would do with the information on his own. 3 weeks into ownership, Nora discovered a problem. While reviewing the financial records with Gloria, she found a series of irregular transactions that went back almost 8 months, just before Eldon became too ill to manage the business closely himself. Small amounts at first, then larger ones, all moving through a vendor account that Gloria had flagged twice in internal memos, but that Eldon had never had the energy to properly investigate. "Do you know who authorized these?" Nora asked. Gloria hesitated. "The authorization code belongs to the former assistant manager, a man named Sterling Webb. He left the restaurant 6 months ago. Said it was a personal decision." Nora looked at the numbers again. "How much total?" Gloria slid a paper across the desk quietly. Nora looked at the figure. It was significant. Significant enough to explain why the restaurant had been operating on thinner margins than its revenue should have allowed. Significant enough that Eldon had been quietly stressed about finances in a way he had never shared with anyone. Nora took the file to Raymond Clark that same afternoon. "This needs to go to an investigator," she said. "And I want to know if we have grounds to recover these funds." Raymond looked at the documents carefully. His expression became serious. "I think you may have a strong case," he said. "This looks like it was deliberately structured to stay just below the reporting threshold." Nora nodded. "Let's move forward," she said. She did not go home in panic. She went back to the restaurant and ran the evening service. She checked every table. She tasted 3 dishes before they left the kitchen. She stayed until the last guest paid their bill. Because Price's Table needed to be run right every single day regardless of what was happening behind the scenes. The investigation moved forward quietly over the following weeks. Sterling Webb was located, interviewed, and ultimately charged with misappropriation of funds. The process would take time, but Raymond's office was confident that a significant portion of the missing money could be recovered. When Nora informed Gloria about the progress, the older woman teared up. "Eldon knew something was wrong," she said. "He told me once that the numbers felt off, but he was too sick to dig into it. He blamed himself." "He shouldn't have blamed himself," Nora said firmly. "It wasn't on him. It was on Sterling. And we are going to fix it." Gloria nodded, pressing her lips together. "You remind me of him," she said finally. "Eldon." Nora smiled gently. "Hope so," she said. Meanwhile, the conversation she needed to have with Marcus could not be avoided forever. One evening she came home to find him sitting at the kitchen table with dinner already made. He had cooked chicken in her mother's cast-iron pan, and there was a candle lit, and he looked nervous in the particular way that Marcus looked nervous, very still and slightly too careful with his hands. She sat down across from him. He looked at her. "I owe you an apology," he said. "A real one, not a polite one." Nora waited. "I let my mother get into my head," he said. "And then I let her get into our living room, and I sat there and let her talk about selling something that Eldon left to you, and I didn't stop her." His jaw was tight. "I was scared, Nora. Not of the restaurant. How big it is. How much it changes things. Of what it means about who you are and maybe about where I fit into your life going forward." Nora looked at him for a long moment. "Do you believe in me?" she asked. Marcus met her eyes. "Yes." "Then act like it," she said quietly. "It was not a fight. It was a line in the sand." Marcus nodded slowly. He said he understood. He asked what he could do. She told him she needed him to stop letting Laverne speak for their marriage, and she needed him to trust her with this the same way she had trusted him through every hard thing they had ever faced together. He said he would try. She believed him enough to let it be a beginning. The following month brought a significant challenge that Nora had not anticipated. A food critic from one of Atlanta's most widely read publications reached out requesting a reservation. His name was Curtis Rand, and his reviews could make a restaurant a destination or drain its reservations by half. Gloria brought Nora the email on a Wednesday morning with wide eyes. "This is either a gift or a test," she said. Nora looked at the email carefully. "Book him for Saturday," she told Gloria. "Under a different name. We treat every table like it could be Curtis Rand. We're not doing anything special. We're doing everything right." Saturday came. Nora was in the kitchen from 9 in the morning, working alongside Devlin to review every dish on the menu. Their relationship had settled into something she had come to deeply respect. Devlin was meticulous and proud and honest in a way that she valued more than any number of compliments. He disagreed with her when he thought she was wrong, and she had learned to listen to his disagreements carefully because he was almost always right. They had developed a shorthand. A look across the kitchen meant more than a paragraph of explanation. He had started to trust her, and she had started to feel, for the first time, like she truly belonged in that kitchen, not as a visitor carrying Eldon's name but as someone who had earned her place there with her own hands. The Saturday service was flawless. Every dish went out on time and perfectly prepared. A table near the window ordered the full tasting menu, and their server reported that the gentleman was taking very careful notes. Nora watched from a discreet distance, serving other guests, staying visible without hovering. When the gentleman finally left, he paused in the doorway and caught Nora's eye. He nodded once, a small but deliberate acknowledgement. She nodded back. 3 days later the review ran online before it appeared in print. Gloria read it aloud in the office, and her voice kept catching. Curtis Rand wrote that Price's Table had not only preserved the legacy of its founder, but had entered a new era under ownership that understood that legacy from the inside out. He called the food soulful and precise. He called the service quietly excellent. He said he would return. The phones rang all morning. Reservations were booked out 6 weeks. Devlin came to Nora's office, which was a thing he had never done unprompted before. He stood in the doorway looking uncomfortable and proud at the same time. "Not bad," he said. She smiled. "Not bad at all," she agreed. The recovery of the misappropriated funds came through faster than expected. Raymond Clark called on a Thursday with the news that Sterling Webb had agreed to a settlement, and the restaurant would recoup most of what had been taken. When the funds cleared, Nora gathered the full staff in the dining room before the evening service. She told them exactly what had happened. She told them how much had been taken and how much was being returned. She told them about the steps she was putting in place to make sure it could never happen again. She watched the faces of her staff as she spoke, some shocked, some relieved, some emotional. These people had given years to this place. They deserved to know the truth, and they deserved to know it from her directly. Devlin stood at the back of the room with his arms crossed and his expression unreadable, which by now Nora had learned meant he was paying very close attention. When she finished, there was a moment of quiet. And then one of the longtime servers, a woman named Bet who had worked at Price's Table for 22 years, started to clap. Slowly at first, and then others joined. Nora stood there and let them, because they were not just applauding her. They were applauding Eldon's name being protected. They were applauding the fact that somebody had finally gone looking for the truth. Around this time, Nora also began making some changes to the restaurant that were her own, not just continuations of what Eldon had built but careful additions that reflected her own history. She added a small section to the menu called Mama's Corner, featuring 3 dishes drawn from her mother's original recipes, the one she had grown up eating at the restaurant's family table on Sundays when her mother brought her to work. The first night those dishes appeared, 3 different tables asked for the story behind them. Their server told the story, and every single time, at least one person at the table looked moved. Devlin, who had initially raised an eyebrow at the addition, watched a table of 4 order every single dish from Mama's Corner, and then ask if any of them could be added to a catering order for a family reunion. He came to Nora afterward. "Fine," he said. "It works." She laughed, which made him almost smile. Marcus had been making good on his word. He came to the restaurant one evening with flowers and sat at the bar while the dinner service ran, watching. Afterward, when the kitchen had quieted down, she brought him back to see the space properly. He stood in the middle of the big dining room and turned around slowly, taking it all in, the portraits of Eldon on the wall, the photographs of decades of gatherings, the gleaming kitchen visible through the pass. "This is really something," he said. She watched him. He turned to her. "Understand now," he said, "why he left it to you. Really do." It was the right thing for Nora to hear him say, but what mattered more was the way he said it, without wishing it away or wondering what it meant for him. Just acknowledging it cleanly. They were rebuilding something. It took work every day, and some evenings were still quiet in uncomfortable ways, but they were both showing up. She thought that mattered more than anything. 6 weeks after the opening of her tenure as full owner, Nora decided the restaurant needed a formal celebration. Not a grand reopening, but an evening of acknowledgement. She called it a Founders' Night, a dinner to honor Eldon Price and the people who had built this place alongside him. She invited longtime staff, loyal guests who had been coming since the early days, a few of Eldon's old friends, and food writers who had covered the restaurant over the decades. She spent a week working with Devlin on a menu that traced the restaurant's history dish by dish, starting with Eldon's original opening night menu and ending with 3 new courses that represented where Price's table was going next. She also commissioned a local artist to paint a portrait of Eldon's mother, whose recipes had first inspired him, and hung it in the entryway beside his own. Laverne had been noticeably absent from Nora's life since the early confrontation, and Nora had not sought her out. But the week before Founders' Night, Marcus mentioned that his mother had asked, very quietly, if she might attend. Nora thought about it for an entire day before answering. Then she told Marcus to let her come. Founders' Night arrived on a cool Thursday in November. The restaurant was full by 7, and the warmth from all those people made the whole space feel lit from within. Nora wore a deep green dress and her mother's small pearl earrings. She moved from table to table greeting guests. She thanked the staff publicly and watched Devlin accept the applause with his usual quiet dignity. There was a moment during the speeches when she looked up and saw Laverne sitting at a small table near the back of the room, not in her usual crisp blazer but in something softer, and not surrounded by people making points but sitting quietly and watching everything with an expression Nora had never seen on her face before. She looked like she was seeing something for the first time. After the speeches, when guests were moving between tables and the kitchen was in the gentle rhythm of dessert service, Laverne came to find Nora near the bar. She stood before her and for a long moment said nothing, which was unusual for a woman who always had something ready. Then she said, "Your godfather chose well." Nora looked at her steadily. "I know he did," she said. Laverne's expression shifted. There was something uncomfortable in it and something honest. "I came here tonight thinking I might find something wrong," she admitted. "Something to confirm what I already believed, that this was all too much for you." She pressed her lips together. "I was wrong." Nora did not rush to accept the admission. She let it sit between them for a moment. "What made you come at all?" Laverne looked down briefly. "Marcus," she said. "He told me that I had been trying to take something from you that was never mine to take. He told me that I had been doing it for years in small ways and one very large way." She looked up. He was right. Nora thought about all the years of quiet dismissals, all the little hobby comments, all the polite smiles that were really something else. She could carry those things like weight or she could set them down. She chose to set them down. Not because they had not mattered, but because she was standing in the middle of her restaurant on the best night it had had in years, and she was not willing to let old grievances take up the space that belonged to this moment. "I appreciate you saying that," she told Laverne honestly. "You do." He paused. "You know Marcus worries about you. He always has." Laverne made a sound that was almost a laugh. "No. He is a better son than I deserved some years. And he has a better wife than I admitted." It was not a small thing for Laverne to say. Nora could see that it had cost her something. She nodded and offered her hand, and Laverne shook it and then, to Nora's surprise, held it for just a moment before letting go. The rest of the evening was everything Nora had wanted it to be. At the end of the night, when the last guests had gone and the staff was wrapping up the final tables, Devlin came out of the kitchen still in his whites, carrying 2 small cups of espresso. He handed one to Nora without a word and stood beside her in the empty dining room. They stood quietly looking at the room together. She thought about Eldon. She thought about her mother. She thought about the 11-year-old girl who had first stood in this building and looked up at the big pots and the busy hands and the beautiful plates going out to tables, feeling like she was watching something sacred. "You know what he told me," Devlin said after a long moment. "The last time I saw him. He said the hardest thing about leaving this place wasn't the restaurant. It was not knowing if he had done enough to protect it." "Did you tell him he had?" Nora asked. Devlin was quiet for a moment. "I told him I would protect it for him." He looked at Nora. "I thought that meant I would be the one running it." She met his eyes. "I think he knew you would protect it no matter who was running it," she said. "'Cause that is who you are." Devlin looked away and was quiet for a while, and then he lifted his espresso cup slightly in her direction. She lifted hers back. 3 months into full ownership, Price's Table had its highest grossing quarter since the year before Eldon's illness began. The staff retention rate was 100%, something the business manager Gloria noted in the quarterly report with a small underline and an exclamation mark that was unusual for a woman who expressed excitement through accounting notation. The Mama's Corner menu items had become so popular that Nora had introduced a rotating 4th dish each month, drawn from the broader tradition of Southern cooking, with a short written story on the menu card about where each recipe came from. Customers had started collecting the menu cards. A woman named Estelle, who had been coming to the restaurant since the very first year it opened, told Nora that she had saved 43 menu cards over the decades and was now going to start saving the new ones too. Nora had one of Eldon's original opening night menu cards framed and hung in the private dining room. There was also something happening in the broader Atlanta food world. Word had spread not just about the quality of the cooking but about the story behind the transition. A feature appeared in Atlanta magazine about legacy businesses and the responsibility of inheritance. Price's Table was the centerpiece. The article included a photograph of Nora and Devlin in the kitchen working side by side, which Devlin had agreed to with his characteristic minimal comment. The photograph showed them both completely absorbed in what they were doing, which Nora felt was exactly right. Around this time she also formalized something she had been doing informally since the beginning. She started a mentorship program attached to the restaurant, working with a local culinary school to offer paid apprenticeships in the kitchen for students from low-income households. The program was Eldon's idea, written out in a final addendum to his instructions that Raymond had given her in the second meeting. He had set aside funding for it, knowing that she would be the right person to run it. The first cohort of 4 apprentices arrived on a January morning, and Devlin, who had been briefed and had said only that they needed to be serious or he would send them home, greeted them at the kitchen door with a 15-minute speech about what it meant to work in a professional kitchen that was so thorough and so honest that one of the apprentices later told Nora it was the best advice anyone had ever given them about cooking. She relayed this to Devlin. He said that was the correct response. She decided she might actually love working with him. Marcus had settled into a new kind of presence in her life. He had started coming in on Sunday afternoons, which were quieter service days, and sitting at the corner table near the kitchen pass with his laptop, working while she moved through the space. He was not in the way. He was just there. It had started to feel like the kind of partnership she had always wanted but had not known how to ask for, where 2 people existed in each other's work without dissolving into it. One Sunday he looked up from his screen and said, "I have been thinking." She looked at him. "About what?" "About what you are building here," he said. "And about what I want to build." He had been working in corporate logistics for 11 years and he was good at it, but it had never felt like something he was meant for. He thought, he said slowly, that he might want to use his skills differently. Maybe help small businesses manage their operations. Maybe start something of his own. Nora looked at her husband and saw something in him she had not seen in a long time. Excitement. Real, slightly nervous, leaning forward excitement. "Tell me more," she said. And she meant it. Spring brought another milestone. The legal recovery from Sterling Webb's misappropriation was finalized, and the funds were returned in full. Nora decided to use a portion of the recovered money to do something Eldon had mentioned once in passing but never acted on: a small private dining room named for her mother, Clara Bell, whose recipes had been part of the restaurant's foundation since the very beginning. She hired a local woodworker to build a custom shelving piece for the room and had it engraved with the words, "She cooked from somewhere deep inside." Eldon's words. The words he had borrowed from her mother and given back to Nora as her inheritance. The night the Clara Bell room was unveiled, Nora stood in the doorway and looked at the engraving and felt something settle in her chest. The way something settles when a thing is finally exactly right. Devlin stood beside her. After a moment he said quietly, "She must have been something." "She was," Nora said. "She was exactly who I wanted to become." The summer was busy in the best way. Full reservation books, a catering partnership with a major cultural festival, a second feature in the Atlanta Journal about the restaurant's apprenticeship program, and a piece by a national food writer who had driven down from Nashville specifically to eat at Price's table after reading the Curtis Rand Review. Nora was interviewed for the piece. The writer asked her what it felt like to step into someone else's legacy. Nora thought about the question carefully before answering. She said, "It doesn't feel like stepping into someone else's anything. Feels like finally stepping into my own." She said, "Eldon didn't leave me his dream. He left me the space to build mine." The writer published the piece with that quote at the top. Nora did not see it until Gloria printed it out and left it on her desk with a small yellow sticky note that said, "This is exactly right." One evening in August, about a year after she had first received the phone call that changed her life, Nora arrived at the restaurant before anyone else the way she always did. She let herself in through the back, turned on the kitchen lights, and stood for a moment in the quiet of the big professional space she had come to know better than any room she had ever lived in. She looked at the stoves and the prep counters and the rack of pots and the whiteboard where Devlin's handwriting listed the prep schedule in his careful block letters. She thought about her mother standing in this kitchen 30 years ago. She thought about Eldon's voice, patient and warm and absolutely certain of what she was capable of. She thought about the girl she had been, watching all of this from the outside and feeling like it was something almost too large to dream of. And then she tied her apron, turned on her burner, and got to work. 'Cause this was not a dream anymore. This was her life, and it was exactly where she was supposed to be. When the staff began arriving 40 minutes later, they found everything already started: the stock on the stove, the pastry dough resting, the prep notes updated. Bet the long-serving server walked into the kitchen, saw the state of things, and looked at Nora. "You got in early again," she said. Nora smiled. "Somebody has to," she said. Bet laughed and the morning began. That fall, something happened that no one expected, least of all Nora. A call came in through the reservation line that was flagged immediately by the front-of-house manager, a young woman named Precious who had joined the team 8 months before and turned out to have the organizational instincts of someone twice her experience. "Ms. Bell," Precious said, knocking on the office door, "there is a message for you." She handed over a printed email. Nora read it. Her eyebrows rose slightly. The James Beard Foundation was reaching out regarding a nomination. Nora read the email a second time. Then she set it on the desk. Then she picked it up and read it a third time. She went to find Devlin. He was in the kitchen reviewing the evening special with one of the apprentices. She waited until the apprentice had gone to prep station and then showed him the email without a word. Devlin read it. He handed it back. His expression did not change, but she had known him long enough to know. That the very slight shift in his jaw meant he was quietly moved. "You should call them back today," he said. She nodded. "Obviously," she said. "Good," he replied, and went back to his knife. Nora called Raymond Clark first because she called him for everything that felt significant now. He responded with the kind of measured enthusiasm that was his version of leaping in the air. "This is wonderful, Nora," he said, and she could hear that he meant it all the way through. She called Marcus second. He went very quiet on the phone for a moment and then said, "Nora Bell." That's all he said, just her name, but he said it like it was the best 2 words he had ever put together. She had to hold the phone away from her face for a moment because she was smiling too hard to look professional. She called her father-in-law third because Marcus's father Randolph had always been kind to her and had never once made her feel small. He cried. She did not tell him she cried a little too. Then she called back the James Beard Foundation. That winter, Price's Table was formally nominated for an award in the category of Outstanding Restaurant. The announcement was made public in December, and the response in Atlanta was immediate and warm. Articles appeared. Longtime customers wrote letters. Bet cried in the walk-in refrigerator because she said she did not want anyone to see her and then came out with red eyes and everyone saw her anyway. Devlin gave a single interview to a cooking publication and said 3 sentences, all of them exactly right. The third sentence was, "What Ms. Bell has done here is honor the past without being afraid of the future." Nora had that sentence printed on a card and put it in her desk drawer. Not to show anyone. Just to have near her when she needed to remember what she was doing and why. January came and with it a piece of unexpected news. Laverne had found a small commercial space 2 neighborhoods over from Price's Table. She had signed a lease. She was going to open a restaurant. It was going to be a small place, 30 seats, focused on home cooking at accessible prices, the kind of everyday neighborhood spot that Laverne had talked about the night she came to Nora's office but that Nora had half expected her to abandon when the embarrassment of the moment faded. She had not abandoned it. She had acted on it. She came to Nora one morning with a folder of rough plans. Her energy was different, quieter, more grounded. She was not performing competence or authority. She was just working. "I wanted to ask your advice," she said. "About suppliers. About the kitchen setup." Nora looked at her across the desk for a moment, and then opened her drawer and pulled out a list she used for her own vendor referrals. She went through it with Laverne point by point and did not make her feel small for not knowing things and did not remind her of any of the history between them. Because that was not the kind of person Nora wanted to be. When Laverne left an hour later she said, "Thank you, Nora." Nora said good luck. And she meant it. Spring came back around, Nora's second spring as the owner of Price's Table. The apprenticeship program had grown to 8 students. The Mama's Corner menu had spawned a small printed cookbook that the restaurant offered for sale at the host's stand, and which had sold 300 copies in the first 2 weeks. The Clara Bell private dining room was fully booked every weekend. And Devlin had won a regional award for his cooking that he had accepted with the brevity of a man who believed the food should speak and didn't see why he should add to it. Their relationship had grown into something Nora thought of as a deep professional friendship, even if Devlin would probably have called it a satisfactory working arrangement, which amounted to the same thing. Marcus had left his corporate job in March and was in the early stages of building his consulting practice. He had 3 small business clients, he was working long hours, and he was the most alive she had seen him in years. They cooked dinner together on Sunday nights, really cooked, not just assembling things from the refrigerator, but standing together at the stove with music on, taking their time. Those Sunday evenings had become the thing Nora looked forward to most each week. More than press coverage, more than full reservation books, more than any of the milestones that had stacked up over the past year. Just the 2 of them at the stove, figuring out how to make something good together. She thought Eldon would have liked that very much. The James Beard Awards ceremony was held in June. Nora flew to the ceremony with Marcus and Gloria, who had never been on a plane before and refused to acknowledge this by anything other than gripping her armrest with dignified intensity for the first 40 minutes of the flight. Devlin came separately because he had a prior commitment and arrived at the venue in a suit that Nora noted was impeccably fitted, which he declined to comment on. Price's Table did not win the award that night. The category was fiercely competitive, and the winner was a long-established restaurant in New Orleans with a 40-year history of excellence. Nora applauded genuinely. She meant it. She was sitting in that room at that table with her name in that program as the owner of that restaurant. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. On the flight home, Marcus fell asleep against her shoulder, and Gloria looked out the window at the dark below them and said, "I have been at that restaurant for 20 years. I have watched people come and go. And I want you to know that what you have done this year is the best thing that has happened to that place since Eldon opened the doors." Nora looked at her profile against the dark window. "Thank you, Gloria," she said. Gloria nodded once and said nothing else, and they flew home in peaceful quiet. Back in Atlanta, life continued the way good things do, not with dramatic peaks but with steadiness and depth. And the daily pleasure of work that matters. The restaurant hummed along. The staff had settled into a cohesion that showed in everything: the timing of the service, the quality of the food, the way the team handled difficulty without falling apart. Nora had started hosting quarterly staff dinners, evenings where the kitchen cooked for themselves, sitting at the long prep tables after close, eating and talking. These evenings were her favorite management tool because they were not management at all. They were just people who cared about the same thing sitting together and being honest. At one of these dinners, Bette stood up and made a small toast. She said, "To Eldon, who built this place. And to Nora, who knew what to do with it." The table lifted their glasses and drank, and Devlin, sitting at the far end, lifted his glass half a beat later than everyone else, which was his way of joining in while maintaining plausible deniability about having feelings. Nora saw it. She did not say a word. She held it quietly. The second autumn brought a new challenge and a new opportunity at the same time. A developer approached Nora about opening a second location of Price's Table in a new mixed-use development going up in Midtown. The terms were attractive. The visibility would be significant. And it would mean expanding the restaurant into something Eldon had never done. She sat with the proposal for 2 weeks. She talked to Gloria about the financials. She talked to Devlin about the operational realities. She talked to Marcus, who was now running his own consulting firm from a small office on Auburn Avenue and who had developed the habit, she noticed with quiet pleasure, of asking exactly the right questions. And then she thought about Eldon. What would he have done? She did not think Eldon would have expanded. He had always said, "Better one table perfectly served than 10 tables served adequately." But then she also knew that Eldon had trusted her to make the restaurant her own. Not to freeze it in amber but to bring it forward. She called the developer and asked for a meeting. She came to that meeting with a counterproposal. Not a second Price's Table. A different restaurant entirely. One that carried the spirit of Price's Table but had its own name and its own concept. Something rooted in the same tradition of Southern cooking but specifically dedicated to the recipes and techniques of Black women chefs across American history. The developer was surprised. He had not expected a counter-proposal. He read through it. He said he would think about it. 2 weeks later he said yes. Nora named the new restaurant Clara's, after her mother. On the morning she signed the lease for Clara's, she drove to the cemetery where her mother was buried before she went to the lawyer's office. She stood at the grave for a few minutes. She did not say anything out loud because she did not need to. She thought her mother already knew. Then she drove downtown and signed her name, and the new chapter began. The months of building Clara's were some of the most challenging of Nora's life, and also some of the most satisfying. She was not splitting her attention in a way that diminished either place. She had hired a general manager for Price's Table, a man named Henry Obie who had come up through the industry with 10 years of serious experience, and who had the combination of rigor and warmth that Nora believed great hospitality management required. Devlin had vetted Henry carefully and had given his assessment. In 4 words, "He will do fine," which from Devlin was a ringing endorsement. Meanwhile, the creative work of building Clara's menu was something Nora shared with a young chef named Adiz Morrow, who she had found through the culinary school apprenticeship program. Adiz was 26 years old, obsessively talented, and had spent a year in Price's Table kitchen learning everything she could before Nora approached her about Clara's. When Nora explained the concept, Adiz got very quiet. And then said, "My grandmother used to cook from a notebook she kept since the 1950s. Nora said, "I would like to see that notebook." They built the first version of the Clara's menu together from a combination of Adiz's grandmother's notebook, Nora's mother's recipes, and a research process that took them through church cookbooks, community archives, and oral history interviews with elderly women in Atlanta who had been cooking since before either of them was born. It was some of the best work Nora had ever done. Not the hardest. The hardest was still those early weeks at Price's table, learning the bones of a business while managing her own grief and everyone else's uncertainty. But this work had a particular quality of joy to it that she had not fully felt since she was a child, watching her mother cook, and understanding without words that something sacred was happening. Clara's opened on a Thursday in April, 2 years to the month from the day Nora had first received Raymond Clark's phone call. The space was smaller than Price's table, 42 seats, warm-lit, with original artwork by Atlanta-based black artists on every wall and a small panel near the entrance that told the story of the restaurant's inspiration. The opening night was full to capacity with a wait list of 60. Nora wore her mother's earrings again. She stood in the kitchen during service and watched Adiz move through the space with a kind of quiet authority that only comes from genuine knowledge and genuine care. She thought about what Eldon had said to her in the hospital. "I am leaving you something, Nora girl. Not because you need saving. Because you are the only one who understands what I built." She understood something then that she had not fully understood the first time she read those words. He was not just talking about Price's table. He was talking about her, about what she carried, about the capacity he could see in her that she had not yet seen in herself. He had left her a restaurant, but what he had really given her was permission. Permission to become the person she had always had the ingredients to be. The next morning, every food publication that mattered had something to say about Clara's. The reviews called it revelatory and essential and long overdue. Curtis Rand, who had slipped in the night before under a reservation name, wrote that the food at Clara's was an act of recovery, a word Nora found so exactly right that she saved the review and kept it in the same desk drawer as Devlin's sentence. The months after the opening of Clara's were full in a way Nora had not expected to be able to sustain but did. She was across both restaurants every day, not managing every detail but knowing every detail and trusting the people she had placed in each room to carry what she had given them. Henry ran Price's table with the calm authority she had known he would. Adiz ran the kitchen at Clara's with a focused intensity that reminded Nora of her own early days at Price's table when every service felt like a kind of test she was determined to pass. The apprenticeship program had now produced 2 full graduates, both of whom were working in Atlanta restaurants. One of them, a young man named Tobias, had started as a dishwasher at Price's table at 17 and was now, at 22, working the grill station at a respected downtown restaurant and taking night classes in business management. Nora had written his letter of recommendation herself. She kept a copy of it in the drawer too. By this point, the drawer had become a kind of archive of the things that mattered. Devlin's sentence. Curtis Rand's word. Gloria's sticky note. Tobias's letter. Eldon's original letter, now worn at the folds from being read. And one more thing, a photograph that Bet had taken at one of the quarterly staff dinners, unposed and slightly blurry, of Nora and Devlin and Adiz and Marcus and Gloria and Precious and Henry all crowded around the long prep table, everyone talking at once, everyone laughing. Nora had it printed and placed in the drawer without framing it because she did not want it to become official. She wanted it to stay exactly what it was. Moment. Real one. Real ones deserve to be kept close. That winter, Nora received another call from the James Beard Foundation. Price's Table was nominated again. And so was Clara's in the category of Best New Restaurant. The Atlanta food world responded with a warmth that felt like a city wrapping its arms around 2 restaurants and saying, "Yes, these are ours." Nora went for a walk after she heard the news. She did not call anyone for an hour. She walked through Eldon's old neighborhood where Price's Table had stood for 40 years, past the barber shop and the community garden and the church where her mother had sung in the choir, and she thought about the long line of people and choices and love and losses that had led to this morning. She thought about how strange and right it was that grief had opened into this. That losing Eldon had become a kind of becoming. She had not replaced his legacy. She had grown from it. She walked back to Price's table and pushed through the back door into the kitchen where Devlin was already at his station, and the prep team was already moving, and the morning was already underway. She tied her apron. Devlin glanced at her sideways. "You heard," he said. It was not a question. She smiled. "We heard," she said. He nodded. "Good," he said. And that was enough. The James Beard Awards were held again in June. The third one Nora had attended. Marcus came. So did Gloria. So did Adiz, who wore a gold dress and looked like someone who had been waiting her whole life for exactly this kind of evening. Devlin came in his suit. Bet had made everyone small handwritten cards that she had decorated with drawings of the dishes they were most known for, which had made everyone slightly emotional in the van on the way to the airport. The ceremony was large and warm and full of people who had dedicated themselves to the making and sharing of food, and Nora felt completely at home there in a way she had not expected to feel the first time she attended. Clara's was announced as a finalist in its category early in the evening. Adiz gripped the table. Nora put her hand briefly over hers. When the winner was announced, it was not Clara's. Adiz exhaled and sat back, and Nora leaned over and said quietly, "Next year." Adiz smiled and said, "Absolutely." Later in the ceremony, Price's table's category came up. Outstanding Restaurant. The category that held some of the most established names in American dining. Nora sat very still. She thought about nothing in particular. Just the room. Just the people beside her. Just the weight of the evening and everything it contained. The envelope was opened. The award went to a restaurant in Charleston with a 35-year legacy and a chef-owner who had been nominated for the past 7 years and who accepted with deep and obvious emotion. The room gave him a long warm ovation. Nora clapped until her hands hurt, and she meant every bit of it. She did not feel the absence of the win the way she had expected to. She felt only the fullness of being here, of being known in this room, of having built something worth knowing. On the flight home, Adiz fell asleep across 2 seats. Gloria looked out the window again. Marcus held Nora's hand in the dark of the cabin and did not say anything for a long time, and then said, "I am proud of you." She turned to look at him. Not because of the nomination. He looked at her. Because of what you did with all of it. Because of the way you carried it. She thought about the morning in the parking garage with Eldon's letter. She thought about the first day she walked into Price's table as the owner, and felt Devlin's careful assessment of her like a weather system she would have to learn to navigate. She thought about Laverne's pearl necklace and the silence at her dinner table, and her mother's cast iron pan and the first time Bet had started to clap. She thought about the drawer full of real things. She leaned her head on Marcus's shoulder. "Thank you," she said. "I could not have done any of this without you deciding to actually show up." He laughed quietly. "That's fair," he said. "It is," she agreed. And they flew home. Back in Atlanta it was Thursday. A full house at Price's table, a solid service at Clara's, an apprentice on the grill station who had finally mastered the timing on his pan sauce and who Devlin had acknowledged by saying "better," which the apprentice later reported to Nora with the expression of someone who had received a significant honor. Nora sat in her office at Price's table between services and looked at the window that faced the back garden where one of the sous chefs was taking a short break in the afternoon light. She thought about the letter in her drawer. "Your mother's hands," Eldon had written. "A heart that puts love into it." She thought about what that meant not just in a kitchen but in a life. A heart that puts love into it. Into the work and the people and the difficulty and the rebuilding. Into the moments you could not have planned and the losses you had not expected and the places where you arrived anyway because you had put love into the getting there. She thought it might be the most important instruction anyone had ever given her. And she thought about all the people it was now her job to pass it on to. She stood up, tied her apron, and went back to her kitchen. 'Cause that was what you did. You went back to your kitchen. You showed up for the work. You made something good and you sent it out into the world, and you did it again the next day and the day after that. Not because it was easy but because it was yours. Not because it was perfect, but because you had put your whole self into it, and when you put your whole self into something, it becomes a living thing that can outlast you. And outlast your fear, and outlast every person who ever looked at you and failed to understand what you were building. That was Eldon's legacy. That was her mother's legacy. And now, standing at her stove in the early morning light of a Thursday in June, with 2 restaurants humming in the city around her, and a staff of people who trusted her, and a husband she was rebuilding something real with, and a drawer full of the things that mattered, it was Nora Bell's legacy too. She heated the pan. She added the butter. She let it foam and settle the way her mother had taught her, patient and present and paying attention. And she started to cook. For Eldon. For her mother. For every person who would sit down at one of her tables tonight and be made to feel, for the length of a meal, that they were somewhere safe and full and loved. She cooked the way she had always cooked. From somewhere deep inside. The phone rang at the bar. Precious answered it, and Nora heard her voice rise slightly, a tone she recognized as the one for significant calls. Ms. Bell. Nora looked up. Precious was standing in the kitchen doorway holding the phone. It's a producer from the Today Show. They want to know if you would be willing to come on the show next month. They heard about Clara's and about the apprenticeship program. Nora looked at her. Then she looked at Devlin. Devlin was very carefully not looking at her, which meant he was listening to every word. She turned back to Precious. Tell them yes, she said. And take a message. We are in service. Precious smiled and went back to the phone. Devlin turned and looked at Nora. Don't get a big head about it, he said. She laughed. Thank you, Devlin, she said. He turned back to his station. She turned back to hers. The kitchen moved around them, warm and busy and alive, the way a kitchen should be when it is being run by people who love what they do. This was the shape of the life she had made. Not the one she had planned. Better than the one she had planned. Larger and harder and more honest and more full than anything she could have dreamed up in her little catering kitchen on those early mornings before the sun came up. She had walked into grief and come out on the other side holding something extraordinary. Not because it had been given to her. Because she had known what to do with it. And that was the difference. That was always the difference. It was not what landed in your hands. It was what you did with your hands when it did. She flipped the pan once, clean and sure, the way Eldon had taught her, the way her mother had taught Eldon, the way she was now teaching every apprentice who stood beside her at the stove. The butter turned golden at the edges. The kitchen filled with warmth. And outside, through the small window above the prep counter, the Atlanta sky was turning pink and orange and bright, the way it does in summer when the day is just getting started and everything still feels possible and the whole city is waking up and lifting toward the light. A year later, Nora stood in the garden behind Price's table on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The restaurant was closed for a private event, a celebration she had organized herself. It was the anniversary of Eldon's passing, and she had invited the people who had loved him and the people who now carried his work forward. Devlin was there, sitting unusually still in a garden chair looking at the old magnolia tree that Eldon had planted in the garden 25 years ago. Gloria was there with her husband. Marcus was there with his mother Laverne, whose small new restaurant had opened 4 months ago to a quiet, warm neighborhood reception, and who had come to this afternoon without her pearls and with something soft in her face that suited her better than anything Nora had ever seen her wear. Adiz was there, sitting with 2 of the apprentices and talking with the intense focused energy of someone who had a lot of important things to say and the judgment to know which ones were worth saying out loud. Bet was there, circulating with a plate of something she had made at home and pressing it on everyone in the particular way of a woman who shows love through feeding. And Nora was there, standing in the garden of the place she had inherited and made her own, surrounded by the people who had helped her do it and the people who would carry it forward after her. She thought about Eldon often, still every day. She thought about him in the kitchen and in the quiet office mornings and in the moments between services when the restaurant sat empty and full of light and possibility. She thought about the letter in her drawer and the things he had seen in her before she could see them herself. She thought about her mother's hands and the cast iron pan and the recipes passed down through years of love and necessity into something that now fed hundreds of people every week. and trained young chefs and told the stories of women whose names had not always been remembered the way they deserved to be. She raised her glass and looked at the people around her and said, "To Eldon Price, who taught me that a kitchen is just a room until you put love in it. And then it becomes a home." Everyone raised their glasses. The afternoon sun came through the magnolia tree and scattered light across the garden, and there was a moment, just a moment, where everything was perfectly still and perfectly full. And perfectly right. Then Devlin said, "The pastry station needs restocking before tomorrow." And Nora laughed and everyone around her laughed, and the moment became what moments always become when you are paying attention and when you are surrounded by people you trust. It became a memory worth keeping. One more thing before I let you go. A few months after that garden afternoon, Nora Bell was sitting in her office at Price's table going over the quarterly accounts with Gloria when her phone buzzed with a message from Edith. It was a photograph. Adiz was in the kitchen at Clara's and she was teaching one of the new apprentices how to season a cast iron pan, the exact way Nora had taught her, the exact way Nora's mother had once done it herself in this very building decades ago. Nora looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she saved it. 'Cause some things deserve to be saved. 'Cause some things are the point. Pen. The hands. Teaching. The love passed forward into the next set of hands which will pass it forward into the next. That is how a legacy works. Not as a trophy you win and put on a shelf, but as a practice. As a daily decision to show up and care and give what you have been given to someone who will carry it further than you could have carried it alone. Eldon had known this. Nora's mother had known this. And now Nora knew it too. Not as an idea. As a lived truth. Proven in cast iron and butter and long service evenings and difficult conversations and a drawer full of real things. Proven in the hands of Adiz Morrow standing at a prep station with a cast iron pan, showing a 17-year-old how to make something last. Price's table celebrated its 41st anniversary that December. It was a Friday, which meant a full house on one of the busiest nights of the week. Nora was in the kitchen with Devlin and the whole team, and the service was everything it was supposed to be. Smooth and warm and full and right. At the end of the night, when the last table had gone and the kitchen was being cleaned, Devlin said to Nora, 41 years. She nodded. He looked at her. Eldon opened this restaurant when he was 34 years old. He looked down at the prep counter for a moment. I always thought I would be the one standing here at this point. Nora looked at him. I know, she said. He looked at her again. I'm glad you are, he said. It was perhaps the most significant thing he had ever said to her, and they both knew it, and neither of them made a big thing of it, which was exactly right. She said, "Thank you, Devlin." He said, "Good night, Nora." He picked up his jacket and walked out the back door. She turned off the last light in the kitchen. She stood for one moment in the dark and the quiet of the place that had held her and shaped her and asked everything of her and given everything back. Then she walked out into the December night where Marcus was waiting for her with his hands in his pockets and his breath making small clouds in the cold air and his face lit up by the street lamp in a way that made him look exactly like the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. He looked at her. "Good service." She smiled. "Great service," she said. He held out his arm. She took it. And they walked home together through the cold, bright night, two people who had found their way back to each other, in a city that held their story, under a sky full of stars. When Nora woke up the next morning and drove to work before the sun came up, she was not tired. She was ready. She tied her apron. She turned on her burner. She thought of Eldon. She thought of her mother. She began. And that beginning, like every beginning, contained everything. The whole story, all the way back to its roots, and all the way forward into everything that had not yet happened but would. Because she was Nora Bell. And she was exactly where she was supposed to be. And the work was good. And it was hers. And that was enough. And more than enough. And everything. I'm so glad you stayed with me all the way to the end of this story. If it moved you at all, please show me by giving this video a like and hitting that subscribe button so you never miss a new story from Auntie Stories. I share something new with you every single day, and I treasure every single one of you who shows up to listen. Drop a comment and tell me what city you are watching from and what time it is where you are. I love knowing where all of you wonderful people are tuning in from all around the world. If you want to support this channel a little extra, you can send a small donation and it means more than you know. Now, 2 of my most popular stories are going to pop up on your screen right now so you can pick your next one. Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next story. And if this story made you think of someone in your life who gave you something precious, a gift, a belief, a chance, reach out to them today if you still can. And if you cannot reach them anymore, carry what they gave you forward the way Nora did. With both hands. With your whole heart. From somewhere deep inside. Because that is what we owe the people who believed in us before we believed in ourselves. We owe them the full use of what they saw in us. We owe them Nora Bell walking into that kitchen every morning before the sun comes up and tying her apron and turning on her burner and beginning. That is the gift returned. That is the debt repaid. That is the love made lasting. That is the legacy. Thank you for being part of this one. I will see you tomorrow.